Hey everybody, welcome. We are back and we're ready to talk and tackle Burgundy. Burgundy, also known as Bourgogne in French. I'll put the spelling down at the bottom. That can be a little bit confusing, but in the US, we say Burgundy for the region in the center of France, closer to Switzerland. Now, I'd like to think of Burgundy as both the hardest and easiest wine region to tackle and learn. Um, we're going to start with part one, where we're going to tackle what's the easier part of this, and then we'll get a little bit more complex as we talk about the geography and the appellations. So let's kick it off. Um, First of all, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start with a map, as I like to do. Right, here we go. Okay. So all of France. Great, we know what France looks like by this point. Let's zoom in. So you can see on my cursor that that's Burgundy there in that magenta. And we're going to zoom in. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk about appellations yet. However, I do want to note that Beaujolais here, this lighter pink area, is technically part of Burgundy. Now, because it is a large enough area with its own distinct styles, crus, grapes, though it is technically part of Burgundy, we really think of it as a separate thing. And when winemakers are labeling, they're going to, if they are in Beaujolais and can claim that appellation, they're going to do that. They're not going to say Burgundy. So we're going to discount that for the sake of most of this conversation. Now I'm going to zoom in further. You can see that the entirety of the region lies along this river here, as is very common with wine regions around the world. It is basically bookended between the city of Dijon and Lyon down here. Now, you will see that there's some pink areas up here. The largest of one is Chablis. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that is part of Burgundy, but it is its own distinct style. So we will talk about that a little bit later on. But I just wanted to get into that. Now, before we move on from the map, I wanted to talk about the fact that our temperature here is between, the yearly average is between 31, so right at the point of freezing, and 79, which is pretty hot summer temperatures. And in Celsius, that's 1 degree and 26 degrees centigrade for our European watchers, or everyone else not, not on Fahrenheit. This would be considered a continental climate. Now, we've talked about these before. What do I mean by continental climate? Well, it's not anywhere near the coast, meaning that it's going to be very cold winters and then very hot summers. So as opposed to a Mediterranean climate or a maritime climate, this is a continental climate. In Burgundy in particular, the idea of terroir is very important. The individual plots of land, the exposition of the slopes, all determined minute or big differences in each individual wine. So we're going to talk more about that in part two, but I just want to call to your attention that the geography and the climate of Burgundy is really, really important to the styles and the expressions of those wines. So let's zoom back out. You can get a sense of where we are. You can see, as I mentioned before, how close we are to Switzerland here. Yeah, okay. So now let's get out of here. Okay, we're back. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay. On to why Burgundy is the easiest of French appellations to learn. Well, the reason I say that is because there's two main grapes, and the two main grapes, the white grape is Chardonnay, and the red grape is Pinot Noir. Period. Full stop. Are there some exceptions? Of course there are. But if a bottle says Bourgogne, you can assume if it's a white in that bottle, it is Chardonnay, and if it is a red, it is Pinot Noir, 100%. Now, as I said, there are a few exceptions, but you'll know. One of them, a great example, is the grape Aligoté. I'll put that at the bottom for you to know the spelling, but Aligoté will be indicated on the bottle. So it'll say Aligoté de Bourgogne, to indicate that it is not, in fact, Chardonnay. We do get a little bit of Gamay, again, because Beaujolais is part of Burgundy and some Gamay is grown more in the north. There's an appellation that you can blend in some Gamay, but again, this is not the vast majority of the wines that are being produced there. You'll also see in terms of white wines, you will see there is a little Sauvignon Blanc grown, there is a little Pinot Blanc and a little Pinot Gris. Again, don't spend too much effort on that. That is not what the region is known for, and that is not where your focus needs to be. Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. Easy peasy. So let's start with white Burgundy, because this is a style, a regional style that literally defined a worldwide trend for white wine making. So you could say that the white Burgundian style is something that became mimicked, copied across the entire world. These are some of the best, arguably, white wines made in the entire world. Now, what's so different about them? Let's start with Chardonnay. Chardonnay is a really interesting grape because I like to think of it as like clay. What I mean by that is it's a very malleable grape. It's a neutral grape. It doesn't have a lot of strong characteristics of its own. And so therefore, where you grow it, the climate it grows in, and what the winemaker decides to do to it in the winery has a huge impact on what the final result is going to be. Now, so we can start off with Chardonnay has an affinity for oak. And when I say that, what I mean by that is that when Chardonnay is fermented or aged in oak barrels, it does really incredible things, or it can. Okay. So let's start with the types of oak. Now, you can have oak barrels of varying sizes if they are used, meaning that they have had wine in them before. There's less flavor coming from the oak. So a couple years, 3-4 usages, 3-4 vintages, the oak flavor is going to be non-existent. What that oak does still, and this is for all sorts of wines, is because oak is porous, it's wood, right? You get micro oxygenation. And what I mean by that is small, minuscule amounts of oxygen are on the surface and the interior of the barrel, and they're going to help to soften the wine and affect its texture. Now, if it's got some new oak, if you're putting some of that Chardonnay into a brand new oak barrel, you know what it's like when you smell like freshly shaved wood or sawdust. It has a strong odor. That is going to marry with the wine, and it's going to give it flavors of like baking spice and vanilla, sometimes coconut or dill. It depends on the oak that you're using. We're talking about French oak here. So we're looking more at like those coconut kind of flavors. How much the barrel is toasted. So when the cooper makes the barrels, they make a fire inside of them, and the level of toastiness will also determine how much of that flavor will end up ultimately in the wine. So oak being used with white wine, number one, huge impact. Now, what did that do globally? When you think about like California is known for making buttery, oaky white Chardonnays, obviously white. They are mimicking this style from Burgundy. They were the people that's where like the OG style came from. Now, in France, they're not going to be as oaky as what you'd expect from like a California traditional oak Chardonnay. It's a different region, it does different things, right? That's the beauty of terroir. The second thing, oak aside, that is employed frequently in Burgundy is allowing malolactic fermentation. This is an enzymatic process. It is not a true fermentation, but the acid that is present in our grape juice that is fermenting, there is a process that you can block or allow called malolactic fermentation. And that is when the malic acid that is present in that juice is going to be converted into lactic acid. Malic acid is like what you're getting in green apples, like that very tart green acidity, versus like yogurt, and that would be lactic acid. So you're going to get a creamier feeling. The third process that can be done to white Burgundies is that they're aged on the lees. Now, we should know from previous classes that the lees are the dead yeast cells after fermentation has completed. They die, they go to the bottom of the barrel, and you can either remove them from contact with the wine, or you can keep them in contact. And you can also use a process called bâtonnage, just taking a bâton, a stick, and stirring. It's called lees stirring or bâtonnage, where you're stirring up all the chunky particles of the dead yeast cells into the wine. Why do you do this? Because it affects the texture. Again, it gives the wine this a creamy texture. Now, if you're a Burgundian white winemaker, you can choose to employ none, some, or all of these methods in your winemaking. But when we think of white Burgundy, they do tend to be opulent. They tend to have tropical pineapple flavors. If there's new oak usage, they usually have, like I said, that baking spice and vanillin. I didn't say vanilla, I said vanillin, which is the molecule that is also present in oak. And so it does give vanilla type flavors to the wine. Um, Fascinating. Like I said, these command massive prices on the market. We'll talk more about where in Burgundy you're going to have more white wine production in the second part of this. Now, as always with wine, there is an exception. I should probably share my map again. Share. As I said, we were talking about Chablis. So as promised, this area up here near the city of Auxerre, that is Chablis. So you can see it's kind of this satellite region out here, a little northwest of the main part of Burgundy. Now, Chablis is for white wine production. Again, it is Aligoté and also Chardonnay. The difference is that Chablis is known for not generally using new oak in their wines. Some of the higher end bottlings do, but generally speaking, they're going to have be like chalky, a racy minerality. So really high toned, very citric, very lemony and chalky. So that's what Chablis is known for. Um, the reason is that it is on chalky soil. All of that area of France used to be an ocean, and so that's why in the region of Champagne and some of Burgundy around Chablis, you find all this limestone soil, all this calcareous soil that has calcium deposits from all of the sea life that used to be there, all the shells and things. And indeed in the vineyards is this chalky white soil, and you do find little fossils all over the place. And it does affect the wine. Let's go on to red. I know I said this was going to be easy. That's a lot of information, but don't worry, there'll be a study guide as always. So Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, unlike Chardonnay, is a much more finicky grape. It is a thinner skinned red grape, which means that in the glass, there's less tannin, so you get usually less pigmentation. So usually in your glass, it's going to appear a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter. It is a grape that does well in a cooler climate. And remember, I mentioned that this is a continental climate. And the reason being that Pinot Noir can ripen very fast in a hot climate, meaning it develops a lot of sugar. If you grow it in a cooler climate, it's like adding, like you're halting that ripeness and you're allowing it to develop at a slower pace so that it develops more complexity and over a longer period of time. Same with the white, there is usually some new oak usage, especially in the higher end bottlings. I've talked about this before, but those little barriques, those little new oak barrels, they're very expensive, as in very expensive. And it's really only new for 1 or 2 years. So you're going to save that investment for your best wines, right? You're going to allocate your resources to the wines that are going to command the most price on the market. Now, again, speaking of price, the price of Burgundy in general has blown up. It's astronomical at this point. They're collector's items. People buy them as investments. So people aren't just buying them because they're a wine collector, they're actually buying them as a commodity to resell later, which is a pretty crazy thing. Um, but the profile of red Burgundy is people, this is a little esoteric, but people refer to them as being very elegant. Pinot Noir, it has notable notes of cherries in every type of iteration. It could be jammy cherry, it could be dried cherries, it could be sour cherries, but cherry is almost always present in a top note in Pinot Noir. But then it's also countered with this earthiness and savory quality of mushrooms. So if you were to compare your typical American Pinot Noir, let's say from California, the French version is much more savory and much more restrained and with more minerality. Um, so what else? What else are we going to get besides white and red wines? Well, in Burgundy, 60% of the production is white Burgundy. About 30% of it is red, with a small portion of that being rosé. Rosé from Burgundy, you find it, but it's not like the hugest thing. I mean, imagine, you saw that it's not a very big appellation, and therefore, um, if you have great Pinot Noir grapes, you're going to make a great red with it. You're probably not going to put it into a rosé. That's not to say there aren't good ones, but it's just not what they're known for. The other 11% there is Crémant. So Crémant de Bourgogne is sparkling wine from Burgundy. So from those very same grapes, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which we also know are the main grapes of the Champagne region. This is no surprise. It's just that the aging before release rules are not as long as they would be in Champagne. But you can get great value sparkling wines as a Crémant de Bourgogne, but they can incorporate some of those other grapes into them. So think of Crémant as more of a melting pot. But again, they can be a great value versus Champagne. Now, Burgundy only accounts for 3% of the total French wine production, but that's still over 200 million bottles of wine, of which the US imports 21% of them. So while we're not like consuming most or even half of it, the US versus the rest of the world for what is exported, we are consuming over 20% of that wine. That's according to Wines of Burgundy. So how does that play out in a restaurant or a store? Two things I think are really important when you're with a table and you're selling. Um, First of all, they are expensive. And so that is a conversation that you might have to have with your tables that as the prices are going up, people may have to move from Premier Cru to Village level in order to stay within their budget because we're talking the premium wines are premium price. So that is a conversation to have that if, especially even by the glass, you're generally looking for white and red Burgundy pushing $20 a glass in the current market. The other thing, and this is to make your guests feel more comfortable, is that we throw around the term Burgundy, right? People will just say, I'll have the white Burg, I'll have the red Burg, not knowing that the grape that they're talking about are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, respectively. So, this is one of those regions where people will say, I hate Chardonnay. Can I have the white Burgundy? And that's fine. It is confusing. We don't expect the general population to necessarily understand that, but you should know it as the server, that that's what we're talking about. You should also understand, please, when I was describing the styles of these wines, that when people say, I usually like a white Burgundy, what it is that they mean, or I really like a Chablis, what it is that they mean so that you can make thoughtful recommendations to them. So don't panic after all that info, as I like to say. I'm going to break it all down for you in written form as well. On part 2, we're going to talk about the appellations. We're going to get into the geography of the region and the part that I said is more complex. I'm less interested in you memorizing all of the individual appellations because there's way too many of them, but I would like us to have a general understanding of what styles are coming from where and how the system works there. Like why is this considered the a premium region of France? So stick with me and be ready for your quiz, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much, team.